Good morning. Today is the first day of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And Nisan is called the first of the months because from the Torah this was the first month. And we're up to the third reading of Parshat Tazria. I have something in my eye. Okay, I'll try to do this with one eye. It's a tough sell today. Tough sell, sorry. We're going to be looking at Leviticus 13:19. And there it says, in the location of the inflammation, there is a wool white spot, or a snow white spot streaked with red. He must be shown to the priest. So we're sort of joining the whole story of the leprosy, or the Tzara'at, as we really call it, because it's not related to modern day leprosy. We're joining it in the middle, and the Torah's already had the opening verse, which is the most important one about Tzara'at. From it, the sages learn many of the principles. And we're going to see that today and tomorrow and the day after also. We're going to go back to that first verse. I just want to mention it though, because we're going to be using it so much. And it says like this in Leviticus 13:1, God spoke to Moses and to Aaron saying, if a person develops, so this is a translation after a whole lot of interjection of the sages' understanding of these verses. But even if you wouldn't use their interjections, you would still come up with something very similar in a certain sense, and we'll see why as we go on. If a person develops a wool white spot, an egg membrane white spot, or a snow white spot on the skin of his flesh, and it forms a lesion of Tzara'at on the skin of his flesh, he must be brought to Aaron the high priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. And the thing about Tzara'at is that it's diagnosed with colors. It's all about coloring. Lesions are lesions. And apparently this type of lesion, which is white, and we're going to be talking about actually four different forms of white, plus one more as we'll go on. Then we'll also see yellow and black, and we'll also see streaked red. We're going to see all these colors. And the diagnosis that the priest gives is based on these colors that he sees in the lesion. And it's all about the priest's sight. And that would work together very well. If you have something that's diagnosed with sight because of coloring, then the healing process is also related in some way to sight and to the discoloration, changing the colors back. So this whole process has to do with the priest as the doctor, if you want. And the way that the doctor is treating his patient is with his eyesight. And this takes us to something that we've mentioned in the past for sure. The final verse in the Torah, the final verse of the Pentateuch at the very end of Deuteronomy. It says, the Torah ends with the words, and for all the strong hand that Moses performed before the eyes of all of Israel. What do you mean before the eyes of all of Israel? That if one had to sum up the entire Torah in one sentence, in one idea, we'd turn to this final verse and say that the Torah given by Moses is meant to rectify, to change our eyesight, to change the way we see things. And so it's very fitting that everything here that has to do with Tzara'at is related to eyesight. It's related to coloring. It's related to what things look like. And so let's take a little bit of a look into this. And again, everything that has to do with Tzara'at, and there's a few tractates in the Mishnah, there's a number of mentions of it in the Talmud, is in some way revolving around changing the way that we see or changing things through sight. So colors and the slight differences between shades of the same color are a central aspect of recognizing and deciding on whether a person has been afflicted with Tzara'at, the biblical disease known by translation as leprosy, but which is very different from the modern day disease by this name. The first and most important color is white, and all the sages identify 4 types of white which appear in the verse, and this is the first verse that mentions, we just said it. If a person develops a wool white spot, a white shaded spot, or a snow white spot on the skin of his flesh. Adam ki yeveo b'saro se'et, o sapachat o beheret. The 3 words that we hear translated again as white shaded, wool white spot, white shaded spot, or snow white spot. The 3 words are se'et, sapachat, beheret. These are 3 words that if you say them to any Hebrew speaker today, they will not have any idea what we are talking about. They're not words that are in use. The only one that has a little bit of usage is sapachat, but most people today don't know what it is used for. It's actually used as a translation for psoriasis. So there are these 3 things you find in the verse. A person who has a lesion in his skin, and this lesion is described as either being wool white, white shaded, or snow white. So though the verse seems to indicate only 3 shades of white, the sage is right in the first Mishnah of the tractate called Negaim. Negaim literally means lesions. The signs of a lesion are 2, which in fact are 4. There's 2 here. We said there's 3 in the verse, but really there's 2 that are major and 1 that is minor. So how does this work? There's the bright spot, the beheret, which is actually the 3rd one in the verse that we just read, is bright white like snow. So that's why we call it snow white. Secondary to it is the sign that is as white as the lime of the temple. This major category, and again remember this, there are 2 major categories. Each one has a subtype. So the 2 major categories are called se'et and vaheret. Or, if I would translate them literally, se'et means something that is raised, something that seems higher. And it's not really raised. It's not because you have a pimple on your skin. It's because the skin is turned so white that on any background, even if you're Caucasian, it doesn't matter, it will seem as if it's elevated, as if it's been lifted off the skin, as if it's higher, because of the whiteness. And the other one is called baheret. Baheret literally means something that is bright. So say the sages, this is the 2nd major category, and it means bright white like snow. Each one of these categories, the set and baheret, the rising or the brightness, has a subtype. The subtype of the vaheret, the subtype of the bright white like snow, is called white as the lime of the temple. What are they talking about? They're talking about the whiteness of the altar. The altar was coated with a type of limestone, and ground limestone, and this limestone is white, and so this is the secondary type in the first category. Then in the 2nd category, we said it starts with the rising, se'et, and then it has, the se'et is as white as the membrane of an egg. What is the membrane of an egg, you may ask? Well, you've all seen an egg, right? So there's a membrane. When you take the egg out of its shell, the shell doesn't have to be white. You've for sure seen darkish, yellowish, almost reddish, even close to black eggs that are all from chickens. So the egg shell is not where we see the white. Where do we see the white? And it's always like this, is on the inside. If you cook an egg, if you make it hard-boiled and you take it out of the shell, then surrounding the egg itself will be a membrane that is white. So that's the second main category. White as the membrane of an egg. Secondary to it is that which is white like wool. Wool is also white, but it's not as white. So we have 4 different types of whiteness. But the sages say, so this would be the words of Rabbi Meir, but the sages say the rising set is white like wool, and secondary to it is that which is like the white of the membrane of an egg. And so what we have actually is that the second category starts from wool and ends with the membrane of an egg, and not the opposite, the way the Rabbi Meir said. In any case, after white we encounter, like we said, the black, yellow, and reddish, and the white appears on the naked skin. The yellow appears where hair grows. These are different type of lesions. There's lesions where there is skin, clear naked skin. There are lesions where there is hair, like on the head. The white appears, we said this, and it's not called a lesion then, it's not called a nega, but they call it a netik. And we'll see that later on also. Black hair is a sign of purity, and that the person is healthy. But of course, I have white hair, and I thankfully don't have tzara'at. So there are all kinds of exceptions, of course, that a person can have white hair, and it doesn't have to be any sign of anything. Finally, the reddish color appears, and reddish is actually a reference to a burn that develops a lesion. Why is white the color of an impure lesion? Why is this all about whiteness, the main color here? Usually people associate white with purity, but there is to be too white, like the 4 white shades of Tzara'at that we just mentioned. And to be too white means to be too self-exonerating. It's a person who is always right and everyone else is wrong. Being white, being self-exonerating, is a hallmark of a person whose name in Hebrew is white. Laban, Jacob's father-in-law, and his mother Rebekah's brother. Laban's name literally means white, but he is also called Laban the Aramean, which the sages permute to spell Laban the deceiver. Ha'arami becomes Aramai. Just like the color white divides into 2 main shades and 2 secondary shades, so Laban had 4 daughters. 2 daughters from one mother, Leah and Rachel, and 2 daughters from a maidservant, and they were Zilpah and Bilhah. All 4 of these are, of course, the holy counterparts of the 4 types of white that indicate a state of impurity, following the principle that this opposite this has God made. There's always, if there's 4 in impurity, there is also 4 in holiness. So again, to be white means to self-exonerate, to dismiss one's mistake. When we consider the gematria of snake, Nachash, and see that it's the same as Mashiach, they both equal 354, then we come to understand that the positive side of the primordial snake is the king of the generation who, like King David, is willing to acknowledge his mistakes. When King David lifted up his hands acknowledging, "I have sinned," he rectified Adam's sin, as the verse indeed alludes to Adam, the verse that we started talking about Tzara'at with. If a person develops a wool white spot, which in the Hebrew original refers to a person as an Adam, an Adam. Adam's sin was not so much that he ate from the tree of knowledge, mind you, but that he blamed his wife for his actions. The most important lesson every husband should take from Adam is not to blame his wife. All the world's troubles began when Adam blamed his wife, with man blaming woman. If Adam had simply spontaneously admitted his guilt, everything would have been forgiven. It is this shunning of blame that causes tzara'at. Again, it's not I'm to blame, I exonerate myself. It's someone else who's to blame. And so that's why white is the most important color when it comes to tzara'at. And with this we'll end today because we started late and we can't go over so much. And I invite you to read the rest of the article about the rest of the colors, and we'll also revisit it, I believe, on either tomorrow or actually tomorrow. All the best. Hope to see you tomorrow.